Joining me now to discuss the report is Victoria's Shadow Health Minister, Georgie Crozier. Georgie, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. You said yourself the inquiry had months to get to the bottom of who made the decision on hotel quarantine private security. Dare I ask, what is your reaction today?
Well, Julie, I just think it's so disappointing for all those family members of the 801 Victorians who lost their lives in this second wave due to COVID that there were no answers to the very basic of questions. Who made the decision on the private security? So they've had months. There's been 70,000 documents. There's been hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence, 63 witnesses, and all this time, and we are still none the wiser as to who made that decision. So I think that's incredibly disappointing and frustrating for those family members, as I've said, to those 801 Victorians who lost their lives, and I don't think it's good enough.
The report found the decision to use private security was, quote, an orphan which no single individual or agency has taken responsibility for. First of all, what do you make of that wording?
Well, this is right. This is the inquiry itself had all of that time, all of that evidence, and they can't find the answers to the question either. And we've saw through the hotel quarantine inquiry, you know, the 10 bureaucrats, the 3 ministers and the Premier with their collective amnesia. I can't remember, I can't recall. The Premier himself at dozens of times couldn't remember all of these things. So there is this lack of ability for the inquiry to get to the bottom of what actually went on. And this is what the problem is. The Premier is accepting of the failures, but he's not accepting of any responsibility. And that, again, is incredibly disappointing to not only those Victorians and their family members and friends who lost their lives, but the businesses who have been shut down. We were in lockdown for months and months and months. The mental health anguish and the profound effects that has had on Victorians. These are ongoing issues, and for the government not to accept any responsibility to basically say sorry and move on. No minister, it's just extraordinary. And I remind you, Julie, that you know the Premier himself said, well, the former health minister's gone and the former Department Secretary of Health has gone, but the Department Secretary was actually reporting directly to the Premier. So surely he should hold some responsibility. He should be accountable for these failings if she was reporting directly to him. So there are many issues still with this this report, and I think that Victorians are none the wiser, and it's just simply not good enough that that's the case.
You know, we're 4 days out from Christmas. The Premier has apologised for the very clear errors. The government plans to put all recommendations in place, but given the year we've had and given the horrendous time that Victoria has had, in particularly all the lives lost, the months of lockdown, the tens of thousands of infections, is an apology good enough for the Victorian public at this point in time?
Oh, it's too little too late. I mean, that's the least he can do is to apologise to those poor people and the family members. I mean, goodness me, I just think it's incredible that the Premier could stand up there and say how desperately sorry he was today, when for months and months the anguish that has been right across the Victorian community has been so profound. I think it's absolutely disgraceful that he thinks he can just get up there today and say, I'm sorry, and move on. This is a huge public policy failing of any government in the history state. And somebody's got to be held accountable, somebody's responsible, and he himself said the buck stops with him, so it's the Premier himself that should follow through with the very words that he's used previously.
What does it say that the other states and territories of this nation were also able to respond under such pressure and so swiftly without the deadly ramifications that Victoria had?
Well, we had the deadly ramifications because we couldn't contact trace. So, yes, the breaches occurred in hotel quarantine, but it was the widespread community transmission that just caused such devastation and caused the tragic loss of life and the tens of thousands of infections and the shutdown and the lockdowns that we all experienced. And that was because we didn't have the systems in place or the processes in place to properly contact trace. That is a fundamental another failure of this government, despite them constantly saying that everything was okay, we've got the systems in place, we can do this. Well, we found out now through the parliamentary inquiry that I was a part of last week, that the government itself was responsible for these multiple failures. So the decisions, the processes, the systems weren't put in place. And that is the difference between what's happened here in Victoria and what has happened in other states. And I think it is absolutely telling that on multiple levels, the Andrews government has failed Victorians, and as a consequence, the huge and sad price that Victorians have had to pay because of their failures.
Premier says that he won't resign. He believes he'll be on the ballot in 2022. Do you think that's the case? Will he make the next election?
Well, the next election is 2 years away. If Daniel Andrews had any decency, he would follow through with those words. The buck stops with him. He has accepted the failures, but he hasn't accepted any responsibility. No one is accountable, and that is absolutely shameful, not only because on his behalf that he is pretending that all is well. No, it's not. Those 801 Victorians who have lost their lives, those family members deserve better than what they've got out of this Premier and his ministers, who are taking absolutely no responsibility for the massive failures that have occurred under their watch. Under the Westminster system, they are responsible and they should be paying the price for their multiple failures.
Victoria's Shadow Health Minister Georgie Crozier, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie.